So we're here today to discuss the collaborative process behind the work Peregrinatio by Sharon Calcraft, and this was the great gift that Judith Nielsen provided us through a commission that was so open that it allowed for a collaborative process to happen over actually what turned out to be 4 years between us, Sharon and myself. And I think that created something very special because of that ability to take time and with no pressure on outcome or what it was about. Don't you agree, Sharon?
I do agree. It was because the way it was was sort of unstructured in the way that we had to deliver. There was time to go to and fro, and it didn't matter so much if life interrupted, which it did a few times, because that's what happens. But there was no strain or pressure, so we were able to get into it and spend time really listening to the sounds of the harp in a very minute and very discreet way. I think that was a wonderful thing to be able to do.
And I came to you with my desire for the harp behind this process was to highlight its resonances. So what I really love about the harp is the way it creates resonances and colours that overlay with each other. And I felt that these hadn't been developed enough and not in major solo pieces. And that the original idea was possibly with electroacoustic harp, and then we discovered really together that the acoustic harp, if you could delve into it inside, like dive into it, had a lot more depth to offer that hadn't been really explored just through general effects and extended techniques.
Yeah, well, at first, when we talked about resonance, it seemed, obviously, we all already knew about that from having worked with you, quite a few times in the past. I understood that the harp was all about resonance, but then I thought, well, I think that's all been explored already,
Yes.
I sort of thought, well, I don't know what I can add to this whole thing. What can I do? And then I started to really think about it and think how can we find other resonances, if that's possible. So that was where we kind of started to experiment and actually to have physical experiments with the instruments, like at my place or at your place. We would drive these long distances just to have the opportunity just to be able to listen very carefully and analyse, and not in a clinical way, but in a feeling sort of way.
That's right. Yeah, and I love how we started with the bow. That was something I had used before.
Yeah, we have used that before, but I didn't want that same old drone thing, which drives me mad,
Yeah, so because I love the sound of the bow. That's a very natural thing for the harp to have, because it's got the string. But when I worked on that, we thought that could start, but it becomes a drone, as you say. And then you said, well, can you dirty it up a little bit?
Yeah.
And so just adding that extra kind of dirtying it up by moving the hair of the bow on the metal string gives harmonics, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that was, well, you kind of knew that intellectually, you knew that was possible, but really getting the chance to listen to that and for you to be able to really work around the strings with the bow and to do even more extravagant things with the bow, because you ended up show this sort of amazing... the collegno kind of thing. The collegno and the scraping, which is like an écrasé, and then also this sort of infinity kind of symbol.
Well, that's another way that gesture, because the harp is such a gestural instrument, it's almost like a dance or a movement creates sound.
Yeah.
So when we started talking about the coracle, and then I started to imagine the bow as the oar, and diving around like that, that created a sound.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a feedback loop.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Ideas.
It is interesting because it becomes a very physical way of approaching the sound as well. thinking of it as the oar, which I never thought about. We didn't think about that for a long, long time after. The coracle thing sort of came at the very, almost the end of everything when we started to think about this whole peregrinatio thing as being like a monk in a coracle, you know, over the sort of North Seas, tumultuously, just going guided by the spirit and not knowing where they would land up.
Yes, because that was a lot what was happening in the piece.
There was a lot that was
our
happening.
Exploration together and our symbolic journey together.
Yeah, so that's why it ended up being a peregrinatio in many, many ways, between you and me, between the harps, between the bigger, you know, the overarching picture. It's all a sort of like a peregrinatio, which, the bowing was...
And I remember doing this drone, you said, and I was saying, well, I could get some harmonics on that note, and you said, well, could you just kind of, what would happen if you just tapped with your palm? And, I have to pull the harp back, but then I experimented then at home and sent you through tapes of myself going up here, and then I saw that gestures also like going up to a mast or something, so using the harp as the coracle, also creating these sounds, and it's something quite unusual, and yet it's simply working with the bow on this one string.
Yeah, it was a very simple idea and just really was birthed from the thing of the drone, but knowing that I just did not want a drone at all. But I wanted that bowing, but I didn't want it to just be one pedal point, you know. But it developed, and that's one of the things we were talking about today, is how a collaborative process actually gave birth to these types of sound, all the different types of sound that we found during this process.
And putting that together, and then wanting some of those higher harmonics to come out beautifully, and then I could get them more clearly on the gut strings here, and I found I was able to...
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, perfect.
I don't know if you can hear that here. So those really high ones, I had to really kind of practice those.
Yeah, you did.
So that they would be fail-proof, because that's something we don't learn to do, of bowing and finding nodes up there, so that they would be reliable in performance. So that was I enjoyed working on these as not just, I'll do this effect, but actually that's a technical demand I had to practice, and a physical demand, a technical demand that I had to practice. And another one was the fluidic sounds.
Yeah, well, that kind of the next type that we worked on was the fluidics, which is not uncommon in the harp at all. But we ended up with something a little bit different, didn't we?
Yes, yeah. Well, the fluidic sounds were established by Carlos Salcedo in the 20s. And he used them a little, but they haven't been used in a kind of a melodic, expressive way. And you sent me that little YouTube clip of
Anushka
Shankar.
Shankar, yeah.
And that was so inspiring for me, because I thought, not just playing a note, but how can I make creative...
Expressive,
expressive, using it expressively.
Very expressive and very, very cantabile, really, very, very singing style, the whole thing. It wasn't just like a being effect, which you do here. I mean, I know that sounds terrible, and I'm sure someone's done an amazing thing using fluidic sounds, probably more than we have, I don't know.
But that process of finding it out together,
but the process was wonderful,
isn't it?
And being able to sort of to grab something from that raga thing, which to me was really a beautiful thing, because, I've not studied, it to any depth, but to understand that the many, many minutiae of tiny ways of expressing something can result in this beautiful perfection. You know?
And it's another level of that finesse or subtlety, because the harp has a lot of, it responds so easily to subtle changes in your bodily gestures, and creates different colours that this is another level where you can do very subtle things. And I ended up notating some of the lines you gave me. Am I going to do you know, that, or am I going to do, you know, coming up into the sound? And I explored that a lot, so that when I came, just like in the Shanko, she was doing with the sitar, doing these little subtle things, but I was able then to explore creating them on my own.
Yeah, and then we ended up with a kind of table of about, I think maybe 15 different types of fluidics.
And then you would send, so I sent you through that table and I kind of notated them, but I also played a little tape which I emailed through. And then you said, well, I'd like that one here, you know, and you were able to say, yes, that's the sound I'm looking for at this particular point in the score. And yes, we did things like... And for that, I had to actually develop a technique of doing this. Normally, you would take two hands to do this fluidic sound technique, but I developed a way, because this is a modified screwdriver, which I painted, so it's a little red, and I can hold it like that, good. And actually pluck with one finger, and do that while create. And that was another thing from we developed.
That was another thing,
talking about resonance.
Yeah, the other thing was that the fluidics would not continue to speak unless there was some resonance happening here. So that was something to know. I mean, that was obvious in a way. You thought, well, of course, that needs that sort of resonance here for that to speak properly.
That's right, and it supports it. So, and you had a few kind of pitch groups for this, what we called the thunder, the soft thunder down here. You know, with nail or soft hands, and just just on itself.
Well, you can see how much the strings are vibrating. Anyway. They really are.
Yeah, and it's just soft, but it sets the harp resonating. And then you can do something on the top of that which just supports it, and that's a subtlety that's just beautiful. And we did this kind of thing, which we've done before in pieces, but how to get it going up high, and you get that really high twinkly sound. I love that.
Yes, so do I. I think it's the minutiae of things that we were able to arrive at or spend time over because we had the time, because we could go away and think about it, you know, and not put it on the back burner and let it just sort of simmer away.
Yes.
And then you think, that sound, because, you know, I love listening to sounds of nature. And, you know, I was telling about this bamboo that I've got outside my window, which is like this huge giant bamboo, and it scrapes on the top of my window. And it plays all these amazing things like the fluidics. You can actually has beautiful melodic contours, like really amazing.
Like harmonics, yes.
Beautiful, So I think that kind of seeped into my inner ear, so that it's funny how those things do evolve.
Yes, if they have that gestation time.
Yeah, if they have, but if you're just pushing to write a piece, then, you know, for something like this, which had a special brief, which was that you wanted to discover new things.
Yes,
which I hope we have.
Yes, it feels like that, and to make them integrated into a language that's natural, and that also. It was expressive in the way you were talking about. There's another part in the piece where I was doing some of this happening, and then I was kind of getting crazy with it. I was doing a bit of tablace, kind of tapping here and doing all this stuff. And then you said, well, no, can you make it a bit perfumed? What was it, the tuberose kind of sound?
Yes. I had the sort of sensory thing of the olfactory thing of inhaling the tuberoses while you know, imagining inhaling the tuberoses as you played that, and that would sort of trigger some sort of expression, which I think it does.
It did, and so it made me do something quite different, even in improvised kind of sections.
And it's so beautiful. It really, and the tabla is, I mean, apologies to anyone who's a real tabla player. But
yes, well,
our version of tabla, I think is it's sort of wonderful and exciting, especially in the electronic part when that sort of comes out.
Yeah, so I started doing that, and that was another thing. Sometimes over this period, I would kind of come up with some improvised ideas. I set myself a goal as part of this project because I felt that Judith Nielsen had given me this opportunity to set time aside just without an outcome, but to explore.
Yeah.
And so I spent my time, you were there composing and putting these things together, but my time in that gestation period was to improvise,
Yeah.
which I normally would not do.
And you did a lot.
And I did, and I did a lot, and I would meditate, and then I would sit and explore sounds that responded to where we were together or in that process. And so then I come up with what could I do that was really wild and crazy to get the harp all sounding. And I thought the tapping on the harp and, you know, patting the palms. And suddenly I had something to send to you that was our tabla crazy sound. And it wasn't till right at the very end when you had the electronic track and we thought, put that in there.
Yeah. That was another part of the process which was exciting, working with the electronic section, so that we could bring back a lot of the sound and a lot of the figures and a lot of the types of sound that we've been using into the electronic track, and then develop them, because the electronic track had already recorded a lot of those. We started with recording a lot of the sounds from the harp, and then, you know, working on them and manipulating them with the granular synthesis. So it was a really nice sort of way to work.
I love that with the talking about that electronic track. That I love the way that we just sat a little bit and you know, with a Zoom recorder or whatever, and just recorded various things. How you were able to take those, it was like putting a microscope on them, pulling them apart and creating that track, which kind of gave the harp an orchestra of related sound, but completely different.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about working with that sort of technique. But just thinking about other things that we actually learned while we were going on was the thing of, I don't know how we hit on the idea, but one day I or you decided to actually have the two harps playing. So you had the big and the little harp.
Yes.
And these sounds that come out of that little harp are quite amazing.
Yes, well, that was because you were visiting me and we were experimenting with the various sounds you'd brought, and I had the harp there, and I just sort of turned to it and said, oh, well, as far as different pitches go, you can get quite different pitches on a small lever harp like this. Because of the levers, you can individually set them.
Yeah.
And I sort of just turned to that, and you said, oh, that sounds nice.
Oh, that's right, I remember that now, yeah.
And so I was doing, you know, various things, and then we said, well, you know, if we lifted it up on a box, I could turn to that in the middle of the piece.
Yeah, there was a lot of that sort of choreography of deciding at what level you would have the harps, and how easy it would be for you to actually stretch over and do that. And then in the end, it was like two wings.
That's right.
It was like this sort of beautiful aesthetic of having two wings on either side of you.
Yeah, so there again, that metaphysical gesture and concept comes into the musical.
And the turning around, and because you wanted something you wanted gestural things to be quite important in the piece, and the choreography of everything. And the way that, you know, we tuned that harp in a precise tuning order, so that it would work with, you know, what we were doing here.
Let me just, I'll find one of those sections so that we can demonstrate that nicely, I think. That setting. So you can hear, you can hear just with that thing, and it was just really an experiment that I would lean over, and I thought, well, you know, I could play here and just do something here, but then that working on it, I realised I could extend my technique to actually be playing with one hand on each harp, and I'd never done something like that before. But it was an extension of technique that I really enjoyed, and you can hear, because the harp is a diatonic instrument, which means we can only get 7 pitches at one time in an octave. We can't get all 12 because we need to use our pedals to change that. But if you have the two harps, you're getting clashes that really appeal to you,
well,
Sharon,
I love those dissonances.
because you love those dissonances. And sometimes it was a real challenge for us to be able to negotiate your harmonic, what you're hearing in your ears. So that was just a beautiful process, and then. Back, you there's a wonderful flow between this kind of dream, the shadow of the harp behind, the dream shadow, and this more present harp, and also those, as you say, those wing-like gestures.
Yes, you can really sort of go to town on those gestures, But there was one thing that we discovered on that small harp there, that I just loved that sound of that little frog croaking in the back of the... Do you want to show how that works? It's such a beautiful sound.
Yeah, we called it the frog sound because it's like frogs or water droplets, and it's just touching the string knots at the base of the strings where they connect in underneath, and the string ends just to create a little pitch that resonates inside here.
It's a very resonant sound. It's it cuts through really well, because I know in the electronic track I was thinking, gosh, will that actually come out? And it really came out wonderfully.
Yes, yeah, because it has a certain amount of pitch and resonance. It comes out.
It's better on that one,
It's better on this one. Yeah. It depends. I have to find the right... Some of them...
It speaks well, but it speaks extraordinarily well on that harp,
and that's partly because it's very lightly strung, so that everything is resonating quite lightly, and some aluminium and carbon fibre, and so it has a lighter resonance, and I think that's also a lovely thing about the different resonances.
The two resonances, yes, I know. So we really did manage to excavate quite a lot to do with resonance, which I was sort of worried about at the beginning. I thought, how am I going to find anything more resonant than Salcedo or anyone else has discovered? All the experimental harpists in the world listening to this, watching this, will think, well, I've done that. But it is for me. It was a challenge to think, what can I add to that whole history? I don't know, but it sort of started to come through.
Well, I think one thing that you often talked about was that boundary between pitch and non-pitch, and I think that works really well on the harp. The way, even though I think you commented before, there's never really non-pitch on the harp because of the resonance.
There isn't really, but there's an approximate. There's a move towards a non-pitch, which you can actually notice and you can feel it. But the actual transition between those sort of two states, the sort of the temporary submerging of the pitch by the non-pitch or relatively non-pitch area of sound was something I really wanted to experiment with. And I think we did that. Can you remember a passage?
I like that because it's sort of like not having everything in high definition. It creates a three-dimensional effect, because some things have got definite pitches and some things have got sort of smudged over or smoothed over pitches. I could demonstrate a transition where we did that.
I like the way that also moving between those two states, like it's sort of like a liminal thing, moving from one state to the other state. And I think that's something that we did a lot of in this whole piece. Was the sort of transitioning between things.
And we did this kind of effect which is actually very pitch oriented, and was in itself a new effect, what we would normally call a gushing chord. But it was very pitch oriented between these two, so I had to develop a new technique where I placed both but just played between them. So if you do it in slow motion, you can hear those pitches like that, but you wanted them to go really fast. And I had to practice like that mad to really actually place on those things.
That was a bit scary.
Yeah, it was a bit scary practicing. And then you're saying, oh, can you do it faster? So in the end, and you sent me that video of the flamenco dance.
Oh, yes.
And that gave me the gesture. Okay, I need to do it with this gesture. And it started to come into a different
We talked about
concept.
That and the duende and all of that too.
And so then it started to move, and I said, well, could I still do these? Because I really like that pitch-oriented gushing chord, but then move into moving to the non-pitch,
moving through a lot of different sort of textures, which is something that I had wanted to experiment with for a long time, but hadn't had the opportunity with the right kind of instrument. This is perfect to, to go between those.
So that was another one. So doing this kind of palm effect. So we've done that in other areas, but to hear subtleties in those as it becomes non-pitch, but it does make a difference what pitches I've got. So we had pedal settings even for these.
Yeah,
because they have a sonority.
Everything has a sonority on the harp. You can't get a sort of really can't get a very unpitched sound with it as you can with other instruments, but like string violins and cellos and so on. But it was.
But and we also came up with a whole series of different gradations or notations for whether it was to be purely palm.
Yeah.
Or fingers, or whistling, and we worked out on that very specifically, this kind of whistling sounds and grading between them, or this kind of thing, and notated it very carefully. But in the end, it becomes very natural in one thing. It's not we're doing this effect, or we're doing that one.
It's really. Yeah, I think we just really got to types of sound, and we sort of navigated between the types of sound, which is I think how the whole piece works, and how the whole piece was eventually sort of birthed.
Yes,
it was because of all these, not just effects, which is meh, but really getting into it and finding the types to move between.
Right. Salcedo talked about the resonance of the harp and the colours being sculptural.
Yeah.
So that three-dimensional oral space, you were sculpting it.
Yeah.
I would give you a sound, but you would put it there.
Yeah. I do tend to work with anything I'm working on. It's always a sculptural aspect to it, and also the thing of twisting the sound and almost like a bozzetto, and like a master sculptor doing his sketch. He'll twist and turn and mold that sound.
Right. Yes.
He was molding clay, but with me, I can actually feel that I'm actually working with the sound as if I was putting my hands around it.
Yeah.
So the 3D thing is really important.
And for me, that's really visceral, because I'm actually doing that physically. I'm moulding the sound as I'm playing, and that's how I play the harp.
Yeah.
So if you write a piece where that's how you're feeling as a composer, I can really bring that out.
Well, it's just fortunate that we think the same way. Really, I think
having a sculptor as a mother.
Yes, exactly.
That's
Well, I didn't have
language
my
too.
mother's not a sculptor, but it's something that I've always been interested in, and I like to work with clay. When I sometimes do just buy a lump of clay and just play with it, because it's just soothing for me to do that. But
another thing I wanted to, because you were talking about your the harmonic language. And I'd like to demonstrate the layers that we.
That's because of the pedals, yes.
Because of the pedals, and so when you were first writing, you would come with your harmonic language and give me something that was actually more than 7 simultaneous pitches. But
always.
Always. And so I would work out pedals and say, we'd have to cut out this note or that. And in the end, I said, well, what would happen if we just slid pedals during and just write what you want, and it doesn't matter if we hear the pedal noise of it changing to the new accidental, and actually that creates another resonance in itself. And it became an effect, or it's using the nature of the harp to have pedals to an advantage. Sonoric advantage.
I think that was really good and a relief for me, because I was finding that I was getting very hamstrung by the trying to always remember the harps, pedals, and did Columbus whatever that thing. Going, oh yes, okay, I've got to remember all these things, and I was fine. It was all good, but I was feeling very restricted by it, and it wasn't what I wanted to do or hear. So when you said, look, forget about it. We'll work it out.
And I just moved them.
I was very relieved,
Yeah.
and everything started to flow after that because, yeah, the sounds of the pedals moving
All the time. I mean, it starts with the pedal buzzers, but I'm moving pedals all the time, and during a glissando, for example, and adding sonorities. And just that, so I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 20 pedal movements in that couple of bars, but they're part of the sound.
Yeah, it is totally, and it's what I always strive for anyway, which is not sort of too much of a pristine. Well, it's got to be pristine in its way, but not sort of so pristine that you can't have a little bit of a sort of cloud or a little bit of a
Little
shading, a little
in that.
dirtiness
Yes,
in the sound is something I always like to hear, you know, which is just my particular thing.
And actually it sets up that movement of pedals as another little section here that I really love. It sets up a different resonance. I think it's here. The resulting resonance that happens after all those pedal movements. So you're hearing that movement, and the whole harp is fully resonant, and that's when I move over here. And that's
it's still resonating,
still going.
So in the end, I think we found lots of ways. Well, I found lots of ways that I hadn't realised the harp could resonate in a particular, you know, as much as it did.
Yes.
You know, it was part of the whole thing.
And I'm just as I'm leafing through, I'm seeing another section here. Where we had, you were talking about pedals, using pedals, this kind of sliding, you wanted something very energetic and strong, but it sounded a bit thin to me, so I said, well, let's add a dissonance to that.
Yeah.
And then immediately it adds complexity to the sound.
That was weak. That totally linear thing was weak, and I knew that. I knew that needed to be more. You know, I didn't know how to make it that way. But when you offered that, I thought, perfect. That's great. Yeah. So that's another sort of example of how the collaborative thing can be so. Well, you know, you've got to work with a virtuoso if you're going to work with, you know, something like the harp. You can't hope to not to find, you know, anything. You need to work with a maestro.
And a harpist needs to work with someone who loves the harp. So when I first met you, Sharon, I can remember you, you know, saying how much you love the sound and how you kind of got it. This whole just kind of, you were saying, oh, that you just loved these little harp. You could just go do that gesture and you'd hear the sound. So I knew you were always from the beginning listening to those sounds in the air.
Yeah, well, there's lots to listen to.
There is, yeah. And then another thing that we were that came out of an improvisation I was doing was let me just turn to this so that I don't do it in the middle. Another sound was coming from improvisation was what I call the twinkling sound. Oh, yes. I love this sound. I was just exploring, you know, as another, well, what else can I offer to Sharon as I hear all these little subtleties playing above the bridge. It's an undefined pitch. There are pitches, but you can't control what they are.
That is probably the most unpitched area that we've ever found. That actually is quite unpitched up there.
Yes, yeah. But it has a very specific kind of pitchy thing.
Yeah,
in
it does.
And I sent you that little tape of that, just that sound, and you were saying it's reminding you of highlights.
Oh yes, highlights in painting. Yeah, yeah. When I was away and I was looking at lots of paintings, and you'd see a lot of painters who were like Rubens and so on, but all painters do make that sort of very strong white highlight to do like a bit of drapery or something. And when you're standing away from it, you go, oh, look at that, it's sort of sparkling, that whole thing. When you go close to it, you see there's just a line.
Yes, yeah.
And you think, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So I talked to you about that, and it sort of seemed a bit like those little highlights could come from that area.
Yes, so we found that where it was appropriate, this was building up a big, strong pitch area with all these resonances and pedal movements, and it's like three-stave, we call it the three-stave section, because there's so many layers to it. And so it was a way of adding another little level on top. There. And just that, and it builds up three times. And it's only a small thing, and it only happens 3 times, but it's just enough to give the piece one other little subtle dimension.
Because when we were working on that, when we were doing it long distance, I can remember thinking, oh, I just want to hear a little bit more with that, just a bit more,
Yeah.
And that seemed to just give it that little kind of the elevation that I was seeking in my ear.
And this all comes from colour.
It's a fascinating process, really, when you think, how it's really quite a mad process, but it's so incredibly metaphysical, the way that we musicians and composers and artists work. It's always striving for that sort of, as Mahler was, I love that thing of Mahler where he said, hear it in my inner ear, but how to find the physical tones. And if Mahler was struggling with that, that's very humbling to think, gosh, it is a struggle to find what's happening in your inner ear. You're striving for this perfection in your inner ear, but how to actually make that happen in reality with physical sound.
And a way of, because this instrument has so much potential that it hasn't been explored, but it needs that impetus from someone striving to hear something, and I felt as though our process was kind of unlocking that natural kind of potential of the harp. And so that's what I'm striving. So you enabled that striving from me to have a kind of a focus with your inner ear saying, yes, no, it's this sound. You sent me a page of the score, and using sounds we'd recorded in our session together, you'd say, yes, here I want that particular kind of sound that we got at 1 minute 26, and and then I could work from that, and it was like a shared it's process of bringing out this harp expression, making it orchestral. We're talking about Mahler, but that hasn't been done so much. I love the Barrio Sequenza, and this kind of changed the language of the harp, really.
It did,
and it took it to a new level. But that's in the 60s, and where are we now? What we were seeking for that's a 7-minute piece. Is something, how could you extend that exploration that he's made? How could we extend that into a bigger piece? And that was one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, it was. And I think that it probably, if I hadn't come up with the idea of making it into 2 pools, like I probably would still be writing the piece now, trying to think, where can I go now? Yeah. But the thing of hitting on the 2 pools, which was actually part of the whole process, that this piece, did have very different origins. Like at first it was going to be this thing of all these sort of different vignettes, almost starting with the Jacob's Ladder, then moving into the Pearl Diver, and all these different sort of paintings in my head, things that I'd loved in my life that were going to be sort of small pieces making one big piece. But then I thought, no, this isn't going to work. So then I thought of looking at Rimbaud's Pool at Bethsaida, and delving into that and finding out that the pool of Bethsaida actually was 2 pools. In the end, they found archaeologically that there were 2 pools there, not just one. So I thought, oh, here's the answer, 2 pools. You know, one pool will be the acoustic, and the other pool will be the electronic, and still balancing and marrying the acoustic harp into that. So that was a great thing for me, finding that. I thought, oh, I was relieved. Then we started making the electronic track.
Because one instrument to hold that length for 20-minute work is always complex, and originally the idea would be to have a dancer or another instrument, but I really wanted to force you to find a solution.
Well, you did force me. No, it was well done, very deft of you. No, it did exercise me, and that was good, and finding that solution was really wonderful, and because Patrick, my son Patrick, could sort of work on the electronics with me was also great. So there was,
and that process of finding, so that as we listened through to that electronic tape, saying what would go as a mirror in this pool, what would go from the previously composed piece and sounds into that, and when, and we would say, you know, with a stopwatch, as you said, put it in here or put it in there. And then at the end, when it really has this big cloud, you wanted it to go out with a bang. I thought, well, what can I do as I'm playing with that to create absolute the most? And so I came up with that, just a warning. This is going to be loud. This using this with the fret. Doing that, you know, to use the metal sound and generate that what's called a thunder effect when you do it with.
And the scrape is great with that. It gives the extra part of the sound with the scrape. So that builds the sound into something else, which is what I love. You know, using different types of sound to build all together in. Well, obviously not a new idea. I mean, Lachenmann was doing it for decades and decades ago, but you know, finding the different types of sound that can make one sound.
Right, yes, so using this and that sound and adding it on and going through the different harmonic, you sent me the harmonic structures, so it's not just random, you know, just crashing sound. I'm actually moving my pedals for that to create a build-up of harmonic progression. And doing that and creating those sounds too, so that it has that little ending.
Yes, there's quite a bit of composition in that little unit just there. When if you were to sit down and write that out, actually probably we'll do it just for fun. It will look beautiful on the page. You know, just that whole little microscopic shot of that will look beautiful, and that's what I loved about doing this piece. Was I think that if we were to write another piece again at some point, I would probably focus on those things which had come out so beautifully and make a larger work out of just those things, which I think would be beautiful. So I think that's probably it.
I think it's really good to remember back on those, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And it was such a long process. It was intended to be 3 years, but then because of COVID, it took an extra year, and we really used that extra year, didn't we?
Well, we did, because
went further. So,
it did. Every time when I thought, oh, this is going on too long, and then I thought, oh well, you know, but then it didn't. It just was perfect in the end. It was the whole thing, and you know, obviously one wasn't writing for 4 years. I mean, you'd do it for a little bit, then you'd stop for a long time, and you'd take it up again, and you'd have a different idea, and eventually it turned out to be this Peregrinatio, and I'm very grateful about it.
Sharon, thank you so much for adding something so major to the harp repertoire and to the history of the harp. I really feel that it's changed what goes from now on.
Well, you know, I look back on it and just think it was a great journey, you know, working with you and going over the huge waves in the coracle that we did in the North Sea, and you know, metaphorically, and it was a great opportunity, and I'm eager now to making a new work at some point, not tomorrow.
Yes. And I think we're both really grateful for that, having had that opportunity from Phoenix and from Judith Nielsen to undergo what was really almost a personal development process with
no,
this,
that's so
and it was a
true.
milestone for me, and it was wonderful to have that time to work with you.
The time's a treasure, really, isn't it?
Yes,
I think,
we were granted time and depth.
Time and depth is great.
And Peregrinatio is the result.
Yes.
Thank you.
And thank you.